Trevize felt almost drugged, and wondered how much time had elapsed. Lizalor, who had been snoring beside him, stirred. "I'm glad you were sleeping, dear," he said. "You need your rest." She smiled at him, and for one queasy moment, Trevize thought she might suggest renewed activity. Instead, she said, "You are a king of sexuality. I think, after all, I shall keep you here with me." "You would be better to lose me temporarily." "What?" She frowned. "If I were to stay here permanently, my dear, how long would it be in this moralizing world before mouths began to whisper? If I went off on my mission, however, I would naturally return periodically to report, and then it would only be natural that we would be closeted together for a while." She thought about that. "I suppose you're right. I hate the thought, but I suppose you're right. And you need not think I would not come back," Trevize hastened to say. "I am not so witless as to forget what I would have waiting for me here." Mr. Lizalor almost smiled. "Well then, what is your mission?" "It is time you told me." Trevize hesitated very briefly. It would have to be the truth. He could think of no lie as effective. "Listen to me. Comporellon may be an old world, but it can't be the oldest. Human life did not originate here. I am seeking the first world. I am seeking Earth." The change that suddenly came over Lizalor staggered him. Her eyes widened, her breathing took on a sudden urgency, and she crossed the first two fingers of each hand. "You named it." Trevize lay where he was, frozen. "What should I have called that world, Mitza?" She seemed to recover and said, "We refer to it as the oldest." Trevize felt his temperature rising. "What's the difference?" Lizalor said darkly, "There are words one doesn't say, and that one is a sad word, a solemn word. It represents a world that was ancestor to us all, and that now doesn't exist." "And the crossing of fingers at me, how does that relieve the hurt and sadness?" Lizalor's face flushed. "That was an automatic reaction. There are people here on Comporellon who believe that the word, even the thought, brings on misfortune, and that is how they ward it off." "I am sorry to have offended you," Trevize was quick to say, "but it was to find the location of the oldest that I came to Comporellon. I had a friend once who, like myself, was a foundationer. He, however, was descended from Comporellians, and he assured me that much of the history of the oldest was known on Comporellon." "Did he? And did he tell you any of its history? Did he tell you, for example, that like all the other worlds that have used robots, the oldest was made radioactive as punishment?" "Who did this punishing, Mitza?" Trevize asked. "He who punishes. The forces of history, I don't know." She looked away from him. "Ask others." "I would like to, but whom do I ask? Are there those on Comporellon who have studied primeval history?" She nodded. "There is a historian named Deniador at the university here. He does not teach class because the students do not elect it, but he may be able to help you." "Why doesn't he teach class?" "He is a skeptic. We have them, you know. There are always individuals who pit their minds against the general modes of thought. And for all his skepticism, he will be forced to tell you exactly what any Comporellian would tell you. And that is, that if you search for the oldest, you will not find it." The spacefarers were in the narrow, disorderly office of Vassal Deniador, a small man, little of feature. Trevize had just introduced Bliss to him. "And the blissful lady, is she from Terminus too?" Deniador asked. Trevize said, "She is from elsewhere, Doctor." "Ah, strange world, this elsewhere. A most unusual collection of human beings are native to it. But since two of you are from the Foundation's capital at Terminus, and the third is an attractive young woman, and Lizalor is not known for her affection for either category, How is it that she recommends you to my care so warmly?" "I think," said Trevize, "to get rid of us. The sooner you help us, you see, the sooner we will leave Comporellon." Deniador eyed Trevize with interest and said, "Of course, a vigorous young man such as yourself might attract her, whatever his origin." Trevize stiffened. "I know nothing about that." "And you had better not, in public, at least. But I am a skeptic, and I am professionally unattuned to believing in surfaces. So come, Councilman, what is your mission? How can I help you?" It was Pellerat who answered. "To put it at the simplest, dear doctor, I have all my mature life attempted to penetrate to the basic core of knowledge concerning the world in which the human species originated, and I was sent out along with my good friend Councilman Trevize to find, if we could, the oldest, I believe you call it." "The oldest," said Deniador. "I take it you mean Earth." Pellerat's jaw dropped. "Golan led me to believe, that is, I was given to understand that one did not—" "Nonsense, gentlemen. Perhaps you mentioned Earth to Mitzalizalor, and she crossed 2 fingers of each hand at you? Mitzalizalor comes from the central mountain range, and the children out there are brought up in what is called the good old-fashioned way." "What is known of Earth?" Pellerat asked. Deniador said, "Very little, but the belief is general here that Earth exists in this corner of the galaxy. For the worlds here are unusually old, and it is likely that the first worlds to be settled were close to Earth rather than far from it." "And has the Earth any unique characteristics aside from being the planet of origin?" Pellerat asked eagerly. "Are you referring to its large satellite, which some call the Moon? The legends of Earth do speak of it, but the existence of a giant satellite is difficult to accept. No other inhabited world in the galaxy has such a satellite. Large satellites are invariably associated with uninhabitable gas giants." "What about the story of Earth's radioactivity?" Trevize interrupted. "This is universally told, universally believed. The common opinion is that it became radioactive as the result of a nuclear war, but there is no evidence that such a war took place." Pellerat said, "During my professional career, I have collected a large number of origin legends, many of them involving a world called Earth, or some name very much like that. I have none from Comporellon, however, beyond the vague mention of a founder named Benbali." The diminutive historian cast his eyes upward. "Benbali! Pure superstition. Here is a summary of what is supposed to have happened, shorn of any supernaturalism or moralism. Earth existed for an immeasurable period as the only world of human beings. Then, about 20 to 25,000 years ago, the human species developed interstellar travel by way of the hyperspatial jump and colonized a group of planets. The settlers on these planets made use of robots to develop a high-technology society. According to some versions of the story, they dominated and oppressed the ancestral world. Eventually, Earth sent out a new group of settlers, among whom robots were forbidden. Of the new worlds, Comporellon was among the first, or, if our patriots are to be believed, the first. In any case, the first group of settlers died out. And why did the first group die out? Trevize asked. Why? Our romantics say they were punished for their crimes by he who punishes. But one doesn't have to resort to fairy tales. It is easy to see how a society that depends totally on robots can become soft and decadent. The second wave of settlers without robots lived on and took over the entire galaxy. But Earth grew radioactive and slowly dropped out of sight. The blame is usually attributed to the robots on Earth. Bliss, who had listened with some visible impatience, said, "Well, Dr. Deniador, the crucial question is a simple one. Exactly where is Earth? What are its coordinates?" Deniador said, "The answer to that question is, I don't know." He sank into doubtful thought for a while, then he went on. "Earth, of course, is not the only planet whose position is a mystery. The positions of the worlds of the first group of settlers, the spacers as they are called in our legends, are also unknown. The planets they inhabited are known as the spacer worlds. Legend says there were 50 of them. Deniador stopped for a moment to let this sink in. Then he said, "In their pride and prime, the legend goes, spacers had lifetimes stretching out for centuries and refused to allow our short-lived ancestors to land on their worlds. After we had defeated them, the situation was reversed. We scorned to deal with them. Hence those planets became the forbidden worlds. We were certain, so the legend states, that he who punishes would destroy them, and perhaps he did, for no spacer has been seen in the galaxy for millennia." "Of course," said Trevize, "even if the spacers don't exist any longer, their worlds may well contain records that would direct us to Earth. Are you at least able to provide us with the coordinates of any of the spacer worlds?" Deniador hesitated. "Since primeval history is my hobby, as it is Dr. Pellerat's, I have occasionally explored old documents in search of anything that might be an improvement on our legends. Last year I came upon the records of an old ship from back in the days when Comporellon was called Bailey World, an even earlier form of the Benbali world of our legends." Pellerat said excitedly, "Have you published?" "No," said Deniador. "I did not wish to dive until I am sure there is water in the pool, as the old saying has it. However, in what was left of the log of the ship, I came across some figures. Internal evidence suggests that they are the spatial coordinates of 3 of the spacer worlds. You're free to use the figures, though you might get nowhere. And yet I have an amusing notion." A smile suddenly lit up his face. "What is that?" said Trevize. "What if one of those sets of coordinates represented Earth?" The wind touched Golan Trevize's cheek with icy fingers, and he shivered inside the electrified coat he had been given by Lizalor, who had come to see them off at the spaceport. She showed no signs of discomfort. "I thank you for coming to see us off, Mitza, and for being willing to cooperate with us on this mission of ours. For my own peace of mind, however, I must ask whether you will find yourself in serious trouble over this." She shook her head proudly. "No, no trouble. The government would applaud me for not turning the ship over to the Foundation." "Would they be willing to approve your letting us take it away?" Trevize asked. The minister smiled. "You are a decent human being, Trevize. Now, even though you fought to hold on to the ship, you still take the trouble to concern yourself with my welfare." She reached out to him, as though tempted to give some sign of affection, then continued with renewed brusqueness, "Even if they questioned my decision, I would have but to tell them that you were searching for the oldest, and they would say that I did well to get rid of you, ship and all." "You truly fear misfortune to yourself and your world because of my presence?" Trevize asked. "Indeed," said Lizalor, "you have brought misfortune to me already, for now that I have known you, Comporellian men will seem more sapless still." She thrust out her hands suddenly. "Goodbye, Golan." "Goodbye, Mitza. And I hope to see you when I return." "Yes, you have promised to return, and I have tried to believe that you would." "I will. I would not give up that easily, having had pleasure of you." "I do not doubt your romantic impulses, my sweet foundationer, but those who venture outward on a search for the oldest will never come back anywhere." Trevize smiled tenderly. "That is superstition." "No," she answered. "It is the truth." "Golan," Pellerat was saying several days and several long hyperspatial jumps out from Comporellon, "does it bother you if I watch?" "Not at all, Janov." "If I ask questions?" "Go ahead." "Then what are you doing?" Pellerat asked. Trevize took his eyes off the view screen. "I've got to measure the distance of each star that seems to be near the coordinates for the first forbidden world we're traveling to, as adjusted for the passage of time since the coordinates were first mapped. That's so I can determine how near the stars really are to the world. Their gravitational fields must be known, and for that I need mass and distance. Otherwise, one can't be sure of a clean jump, because the gravitational pull of a star is too strong. It's really astonishing, Pellerat said. Think how much the computer does for us. What would you do without it? What would I do without a gravitic ship? Or without my astronautic training? Or 20,000 years of hyperspatial travel behind me? Suppose we were to imagine ourselves 20,000 additional years into the future. What technological marvels would we have to be grateful for then? Or might it be that 20,000 years hence, humanity will not exist? Scarcely that. Scarcely not exist. Even if we don't become part of Galaxia, we would still have psychohistory to guide us. Trevize looked up quizzically. Psychohistory. You know, Janoff, all the talk we have heard about superstition lately has made me wonder if psychohistory isn't just the superstition of the Foundation. Isn't it just a belief without proof or evidence? What do you think, Janoff? It's more your field than mine. Why do you say there's no evidence, Golan? The simulacrum of Harry Seldon has appeared in the Time Vault many times, and has discussed events as they happened. He could not have known what those events would be in his time, had he not been able to predict them psychohistorically. Trevize nodded. He was wrong about the mule, but it's impressive, even allowing for that. Still, it has an uncomfortable magical feel to it. Any conjurer can do tricks. Has it ever occurred to you that the time capsule, along with the Harry Seldon simulacrum, may be rigged by the government? Pellerat looked as though he were revolted by the suggestion. They wouldn't do that, and they'd be caught if they tried. I'm not at all sure of that. The point is, though, that we don't know how psychohistory works at all, and if psychohistory suddenly stopped working a while ago, the second foundationers know the workings of psychohistory. So it is said, Trevize answered scornfully. But anything can be said. Oh, we have the distance of the closest star to the forbidden world, its sun. Let's consider the figures. He stared at them for a long time, his lips moving occasionally, as though he were doing some rough calculations in his head. Finally, without lifting his eyes, Trevize placed his hands on the desk and muttered, I'll let it go there in several jumps and have it recheck each time. Then he withdrew them again and said, Seriously, Janoff, what do you know about psychohistory? Pellerat was taken aback. Nothing. Of course, I know the two basics. First, that the number of human beings involved must be large enough to make statistical treatment valid. And second, that human beings must not be aware of the predictions of psychohistory so that the knowledge does not skew their reactions. The second foundationers are supposed to be aware of them, of course. And upon those two requirements alone, the science of psychohistory has been developed, Trevize said. Not out of those two requirements alone, said Pellerat. There are advanced mathematics and elaborate statistical methods. The story, if you want tradition, is that Harry Seldon devised psychohistory by modeling it upon the kinetic theory of gases. Each atom or molecule in a gas moves randomly so that we can't know the position or velocity of any of them. Nevertheless, using statistics, we can work out the rules governing their overall behavior with great precision. But human beings aren't atoms, said Trevize. True, a human being has consciousness, and his behavior is sufficiently complicated to make it appear to be free will. How Seldon handled that, I haven't any idea. But I'm sure I couldn't understand it, even if it were explained to me. But he did it. Trevize said, Doesn't that seem to you a quicksandish foundation on which to build an enormous mathematical structure? If those two requirements are not truly met, then everything collapses. Or if the requirements are not exactly false or inadequate, but simply weaker than they should be, psychohistory might work adequately for centuries, and then, upon reaching some particular crisis, would collapse, as it did temporarily in the time of the mule. Or, what if there is a third requirement? What third requirement? Pellerat frowned slightly. I don't know. Maybe the third requirement is an assumption so taken for granted that no one even thinks of mentioning it. But I see we are now in the neighborhood of the sun of the forbidden world. And indeed, centered on the screen was a bright star, so bright, in fact, that all the other stars were suddenly washed out. And beyond the star were 3 small planets. The computer's scan of the planets identified the innermost as inhabitable, that is, having a surface temperature in the liquid water range and an oxygen atmosphere as well. Trevize waited for its orbit to be computed. "There's no giant satellite," said Trevize with disappointment. "So it isn't Earth." The target planet, when they got close enough to see it, was in potential beautiful. Its continental areas were large but sinuous. There were lush tracts of both tropical and temperate forests, rimmed by grasslands. But there were also semi-barren areas scattered through the forest, and parts of the grasslands were thin and spare. This gave the planet as a whole a curiously moth-eaten look. The far star was drifting slowly now across a 500-kilometer-wide stretch of scattered heath and firs with occasional clumps of trees. "What do you think of that?" Trevize pointed suddenly, as a ship came to a drifting halt and hovered over a range of tumbled mounds of soil and sparse grass. "It doesn't look like anything to me," said Pellerat. "There's a straight line arrangement to that junk, parallel lines, and you can make out some faint lines at right angles, too. See? See? You can't get that in any natural formation. That's human architecture, marking out foundations and walls." "I suppose it is," said Pellerat. "If it involves archaeological research, professionals would take years to—" "Let's follow those lines and see where they take us," Trevize said. It was toward one end of the area, at a place where trees were somewhat more thickly clumped, that they came to standing walls, or partially standing ones, and Trevize brought the spaceship down. He said, "We seem to have chosen a comfortable latitude or season of the year, and after Comporellon, that is a pleasure." He was clasping a broad belt about his waist as he spoke, and Bliss said sharply, "What's that, Trevize?" "Here on my right is my blaster, and here on my left my neuronic whip. It's just my old Navy training. I'm not going into an unknown world unarmed." "2 varieties of murder," said Bliss with distaste. "Only one," Trevize corrected her. "The blaster kills. The neuronic whip merely inflicts pain." "Why are you taking them?" "Because it's an enemy world." "Trevize, it's an empty world," Bliss said. "There's no technological society, it would seem. But what if there are post-technological primitives?" "I detect no human neuronic activity, Trevize. That eliminates primitives of any type, post-technological or otherwise." "Then I won't have to use my weapons. But I suggest that you two also—" "No," said Bliss. "I will not make even a gesture in the direction of killing, or inflicting pain either." "You, Janov?" Pellerat hesitated, then shook his head. "We didn't have arms on Comporellon. I wouldn't know how to use one of those things, and in an emergency I just run anyway, and get killed." "You won't get killed, Pell," Bliss said. "Gaia has you in Mayarit's protection, and that posturing naval hero as well." Outside, the light had an almost subliminal oddness, and the world had a distinctively musky smell. The trees nearby looked old, with gnarled bark and trunks a little off the vertical. Was it the trees that lent a somehow menacing ambience to the world? Or was it something else? Was it that it was not merely an uninhabited world, but a deserted one? Trevize had never been on a deserted world before, never thought a world could be deserted. He proposed that Pellerat and Bliss go off to explore the ruins. "You, Janov, will be able to judge the value of any records you find, and I imagine, too, that you understand writings in ancient galactic." Pellerat said, "Come, Bliss, I've been a collector of old tales all my life, so I've never actually put my hands on ancient documents. Imagine if we could find—" Pellerat's voice faded as Trevize watched them walk away. Slowly he walked along the border of the hill. He yawned. Certainly nothing exciting was happening, and he wondered if he might not retreat to the ship and take a nap. No, unthinkable. Clearly he had to stand guard. And then he realized that he was not alone. Until then he had not seen any living creature other than plant growth, insects, and an occasional bird. He had neither seen nor heard anything approach, but now an animal stood between him and the ship. It was a dog, large, lean, and rangy, with long legs and pointy teeth. The dog backed away a step, and then its upper lip wrinkled into a snarl, and it growled. Trevize froze. His eyes caught motion to one side, and his head turned. There were two other dogs advancing from that direction. They looked just as deadly as the first. Deadly. That was the appropriate adjective. His heart was suddenly pounding. The way to the ship was blocked. Trevize started sidling toward a tree. At some point, when he was close enough, he would have to make the dash. He could not wait too long or run too soon. Now. He felt the snap of jaws close on the heel of one foot. Trevize had not climbed a tree since he was 10. In this case, though, the trunk he started up was not quite vertical, and the bark was gnarled and offered handholds. He found himself now sitting in a crotch, perhaps 10 meters above the ground, while at the base of the tree 5 dogs sat on their haunches, staring upward, tongues lolling, all looking patiently expectant. What now? Trevize was not in a position to think about the situation in logical detail. Rather, he experienced flashes of thought, which, if he had sorted them out, would have come to this. In adapting a planet for human use, in terraforming it, as the expression went, human beings would establish an unbalanced ecology, which they would be able to keep from falling apart only by unending effort. But if human beings vanished, in the absence of the large predators, the legendary tigers and grizzly bears that the settlers never carried with them, the dominant animals would be the cats and dogs that had formerly lived on human bounty. Trevize counted 23 dogs around the tree now, and there were others approaching. He was worried about Pellerat and Bliss, too. If the dogs found them, would Bliss be able to concentrate her powers to the desired pitch of intensity, and for how long could she maintain them? He withdrew his blaster from its holster, took aim at one especially malignant-looking dog in the middle of the pack, and exploded it. Flesh, skin, blood, and bone scattered in all directions. But the other dogs, rather than backing off in fear, only crowded against each other to feed. Trevize felt sick. A voice called out, "Trevize! What?" It was Bliss and Pellerat. Bliss had stopped short, her arms thrown out to keep Pellerat back. Trevize shouted, "I tried to drive them off without involving you and Janoff. Can you hold them off?" "Barely," said Bliss. "There are too many of them, and I am not familiar with their pattern of neuronic activity. We have no such savage things on Gaia. Use your other weapon, the neuronic whip. The disappearance of a dog in an explosion means nothing to the others, but the whip produces pain, and that they understand. Low power, fast. I can't hold them much longer." Trevize followed Bliss's suggestion. He aimed at one dog and fired. The dog fell over, squealing, and the other dogs backed off long enough for the 3 spacefarers to run for it. Trevize had never activated the ship's entry mechanism so rapidly. Night had fallen before any of them felt something approaching normal. Pellerat was in his bedroom, working with his reader and the compact disc on which his lifetime of research was stored. Bliss and Trevize were alone together. Bliss looked at Trevize thoughtfully. "Did it occur to you that this unknown world is reverting to a kind of savagery because of the removal of a single species that is capable of acting as a guiding intelligence? If the world were Gaia, or better yet a part of Galaxia, this could not happen. The guiding intelligence would be the galaxy as a whole, and ecology, whenever unbalanced, would be moved toward balance again." Trevize seized on the argument. "Therefore, doesn't it seem obvious to you that the human mind is qualitatively different from everything else? and human beings are a special case, and must be treated as such? There was a chill in his voice that caused Bliss's eyebrows to rise. But at this point Pellerat burst in, nodding his head as though prepared to shake it off its foundations. "I think we have it," he said. Hopeful despite himself, Trevize asked, "The location of Earth? Have you discovered that, Janov?" "Well, no," his friend answered, visibly abashed. "Not quite that. Actually, Golan, not that at all. It's something else I discovered in the ruins. A stone inscribed in an archaic pre-galactic language. I found it impossible to make out much except for one short phrase which reads, Planet Aurora. I imagine this planet on which we rest is, or was, named Aurora." "Well, it had to be named something," said Trevize, disappointed. "Yes, but Aurora meant dawn in some pre-galactic languages, and some word for dawn or daybreak is often used for space stations or other structures that are the first of their kind. If this world was given a name meaning dawn, it may have been the first of its kind, too. What I mean is that we might, at this very moment, be resting on the oldest human world in the galaxy, except for Earth itself. It's exciting." "But isn't that a great deal to infer merely from a name, Janov?" "But, Golan," Pellerat broke in again, "haven't I told you—" "No, of course I haven't. I'm so excited I can't put things in order. You remember that Deniador told us that robots were the first wave's undoing? Bliss and I also saw a robot. It was a metal object, mostly rust, but it had a head, arms, legs, and torso, like a human being." Trevize rubbed his forehead, almost as though he were in pain. "This changes everything." When Trevize had worked the computer to find the star of the first set of coordinates, both Pellerat and Bliss had watched intently and had asked questions. Now they stayed in their room and left the job entirely to Trevize. In a way it was flattering, for it seemed to Trevize that they had simply accepted the fact that he knew what he was doing. Another star did at last show up, and when Trevize made the jump, it was right where Deniador's coordinates, corrected for time, said it should be. A habitable, forbidden world was found circling that star. Trevize had been absolutely sure that it would be there, and he set the far star into a slow orbit about it. At last he brought the far star down to a gentle rest near a small grove of trees. All about was what looked like pasture land and orchards and grain fields. There were grazing animals, too, but no structures, nothing artificial, except that orchard-like regularity of trees and the sharp boundaries of the fields. Trevize put on his holsters, and then he caught Bliss's eye. She said, "Go ahead. I don't think you'll have any use for them, but I thought as much once before, didn't I?" Trevize said, "Would you like to be armed, Janov?" Pellerat shuddered. "No, thank you. Between you and your physical defense and Bliss and her mental defense, I feel in no danger at all." Trevize said, "I understand. Just don't go anywhere alone." Trevize stepped out of the ship first, with Bliss and Pellerat following. They took in their breath with surprise. The smell of the planet was delightful, but even so, Pellerat was disappointed. "There seems to be nothing about." "Only seems to be," said Bliss, who had already sensed the presence of intelligence. "They're approaching from beyond that rise," she pointed, and 3 figures appeared, as if on cue. Trevize watched curiously. Though he had never previously seen robots, he felt not a particle of doubt but that that was what they were. They had the general shape of human beings, and yet they were obviously metallic. "Can you tell whether they are hostile?" Trevize's hand was on his blaster. "You'll have to allow for the fact that I have no experience whatsoever with their mental workings, Trevize. But I don't detect anything hostile." When the robots came to a halt, Trevize raised his left hand, palm outward, in what he hoped would be recognized as a gesture of peace. "I greet you. We come to this world as friends." The middle robot of the 3 ducked his head in a kind of abortive bow and began to make sounds. "It's gibberish," Trevize said to his companions. "Not at all," Pellerat responded. "It's galactic, but very archaic. I catch a few words. Let me give it a shot." "Ask them where Earth is," said Trevize. Pellerat said the words one at a time, with exaggerated hand gestures. The robots looked at each other and made a few sounds. It was the middle one again that responded. Pellerat said to Trevize, "I'm not sure I'm getting across what I mean by Earth. I suspect they think I'm referring to some region on their planet, and they say they don't know of any such region." "Do they use the name of this planet, Janov?" "I think what I'm hearing is Solaria." Bliss said, "Ask those robots how old they are, or rather, how long they have been functioning." After several exchanges, Pellerat said, "They've been functioning for 26 years. If these robots are only a couple of decades old, there must be those who manufactured them." Bliss raised a hand to stop Trevize, and there was a strained and intent look on her face. "Coming now." Trevize turned his face in the direction of the rise, and there, striding toward them, was a human being. His complexion was pale, his hair light and long. His face was grave, but quite young in appearance. The robots stepped aside for him. "Greetings, wanderers from space," he said in standard galactic. "What would you with my robots?" Trevize did not cover himself in glory. He said foolishly, "You speak galactic." The Solarian said, "And why not? I learned your way of speaking from the hyperspatial communications of the worlds beyond." Trevize studied the Solarian. He was wearing a thin white robe that opened in front to expose a bare chest and loincloth, and Trevize could not tell whether the Solarian was male or female. "We are travelers seeking information to reach our destination," Trevize said finally. "We seek the location of Earth. Could you tell us that?" The Solarian's eyebrows lifted. "I would have thought that your first object of curiosity would have been myself. I will supply that information, although you have not asked for it. I am Sartan Bander, and you stand upon the Bander estate, which stretches as far as your eye can see. I cannot say that you are welcome here. In the old days, settlers, you and your ship would have been destroyed on sight. For when members of an expanding society set foot upon an inoffensive and static one, that mere touch is filled with potential danger. That would be a barbaric way of treating people who mean no harm and offer none," Trevize said cautiously. "While I appreciate the information you have offered us so freely, you have failed to answer the question I did ask. I will repeat it. Could you tell us the location of the planet Earth, sir?" A queer look of repugnance flitted over the Solarian's face. He said, "Please address me simply as Bander. If you must use a form of address, do not address me by any word implying gender. I am neither male nor female. I am whole. You told me that you came with no intent of harm," he continued. "That is correct. Then why did you come armed?" "It is merely a precaution." "It doesn't matter. Your little weapons represent no danger to me. Yet I am curious. May I see your weapon?" Trevize took a step backward. "I'm afraid not, Bander." Bander seemed amused. "I ask only out of politeness. I need not have asked at all." It held out its hand, and from Trevize's right holster there emerged his blaster, while from his left holster there rose up his neuronic whip. Trevize snatched at his weapons, but felt his arms held back. Both Pellerat and Bliss were held as well. The weapons flew to Bander's hands, and it looked the devices over carefully. "I'll bleed the energy content off each weapon. That leaves them harmless." The Solarian released the weapons, and they drifted through the air. Each settled neatly into Trevize's holster. Bander smiled. "You are quite helpless, Outworlder. I can as easily, if I so desired, destroy your ship, and, of course, you. Come, follow me, all three of you. I will tell you a story. Bander began to walk forward, and the others followed. Bander turned and looked intently at Bliss, as though truly aware of her for the first time. You are the feminine half-human, aren't you? These other two are masculine half-humans. Have you had your child yet, feminine? My name, Bander, is Bliss. I have not yet had a child. This is Trevize. This is Pellerat. And which of these two masculines is to assist you when it is your time? Or will it be both? Or neither? Pell will assist me, Bander. Bander turned his attention to the white-haired Pellerat. How old are you? I'm 52, Bander. That's galactic standard years, Pellerat said. And how old will you be when you die? Bander asked. I can't say. I may live 30 more years. 82 years, then. Short-lived, and divided in halves. Unbelievable. And yet my distant ancestors on Earth were like you. Well, it seems only we of Solaria learned how life was to be lived. We do not flock like animals, as they did on Earth, and even on the other spacer worlds. We live each alone, with robots to help us. We view each other electronically as often as we wish, but come within natural sight of each other only, rarely. It is many years since I have gazed at human beings as I gaze at you now, but then you are only half-humans, and your presence, therefore, does not limit my freedom any more than a cow or a robot would. Yet we were once half-human, too. No matter how we perfected our freedom, no matter how we developed as solitary masters over countless robots, the freedom was never absolute. In order to produce young, there had to be two individuals in cooperation. It was possible, of course, to contribute sperm cells and egg cells to grow the embryo artificially. It could all be done, but the half-humans would not give up the pleasure that went with biological impregnation. Perverse emotional attachments would develop, and freedom vanished. That is why we moved underground and broke off all contact with the rest of the galaxy. It was to work to adjust our genes. It took us many centuries, but we finally became whole human beings, incorporating both the masculine and feminine principles in one body, supplying our own complete pleasure at will, and producing, when we wished, fertilized eggs for development under skilled robotic care. Hermaphrodites, said Pellerat. Hermaphroditism stops evolution dead in its tracks, said Trevize. Each child is the duplicate of its hermaphrodite parent. Come, said Bander, we can design our children if we wish. We can change and adjust the genes, and on occasion we do. But we are almost at my dwelling. Let us enter. They passed through a door that opened as they approached and then closed behind them. The room was cavernous, but there was only one chair in it. Bander pointed to a wall apparently no different from the other three. That wall is my vision screen. The world opens before me through that screen, but it in no way limits my freedom, for I cannot be compelled to use it. See here, I'll tell you another story. Go ahead, said Trevize. 20,000 years ago, when the half-creatures of Earth began to swarm into space and we ourselves withdrew underground, the other spacer worlds were determined to oppose the new Earth settlers, so they struck at Earth. At Earth, Trevize tried to hide his satisfaction that the subject had come up at last. Yes, at the center. And our fellow spacers, not too far removed from human beings themselves in passions, managed to set Earth's surface radioactively aflame. Ah, that's what happened, said Pellerat. How was it done? I don't know how it was done, said Bander indifferently. In any case, it did the spacers no good. That is the point of the story. The settlers continued to swarm, and the spacers died out, except for ourselves. We are still here. Pellerat snapped his fingers impatiently. But this matter of Earth, is what you tell us legend or history? How does one tell the difference, half-Pellerat? There are no records. Come, half-humans, I want to show you my home.